This week, Bungie hosted a developer livestream to show us some more stuff about Edge of Fate. And despite a lot of it being stuff shown in the preview event a couple weeks ago, a lot of it was really interesting. So I wanted to talk about some of the little things I really liked about the stream and two things I am unfortunately less happy about. Starting positive though, the brand new Armour exotics look really good. We saw all three of these from content creators at the preview event, but it was nice to get some additional info and some developer insights about how they work. I think it's really interesting that the Hunter exotic might be able to surpass the Tangle internal cooldown. So many different Tangle builds are dependent on working around that cooldown, so being able to kind of ignore it slightly is going to be really interesting, assuming it works how I hope it does. The Titan one is honestly just really cool. I love the idea of being able to pull your hammer back. In terms of gameplay, I think it's a really interesting way to encourage actually using the hammer as a ranged melee as it's meant to be. Its biggest downside has always been having to go pick it up, which has always encouraged players to use it as more of a traditional melee, right up close and personal so they can just pick it straight up again. But encouraging range is definitely good to see, and I love the little detail where the arm directionally moves to catch the hammer. It's not something I'd ever noticed in gameplay until it was pointed out. I love little details like that, that's great. Lastly, the Warlock's Hellion exotic actually looks like it would be really good. It's not a big issue, and I know some people tend to prefer those more like passive, throw it onto any build kind of exotics, but I do wish there was more of an active element to it. I just tend to prefer exotics that will adjust my gameplay, but I still think it looks cool and a lot of fun to mess around with, and I can see myself using it for some builds. I'm loving the look of the new weapons and archetypes. We'd already seen quite a few, like the shotgun hand cannon and the rocket pulse. I think those are definitely going to be a lot of fun to run around with, and it was a very nice surprise to see that we're getting a brand new heavy archetype this expansion with the crossbow. We don't know too much about it yet, and there's a few worries about how viable it will actually be, but I can already see some potential as long as the arrows you pick up count as heavy ammo. If picking up those arrows can interact with perks like Overflow or Lead from Gold, then I think this could be a really interesting weapon. But even if it's not the new meta pick, it still just looks really fun and I'm excited to play with it. Two new Banes were spotted from what I could see. Screeber has the return of baby Screebs. I think killing a Screeber enemy will cause them to break into about 5 or 6 baby Screebs on the area, very similar to how they were first introduced back in GMs, all the way back in Season of the Lost. It's great to see them again. I just think they're funny little guys. I'm a little bit worried about Shield. It does seem neat, but overall I'm not a fan that it's completely immune to damage. I can already see some situations where repositioning around the shield isn't really an option, especially in tight areas or if you're playing solo. It does seem like you'll be able to still shoot the enemy's feet, or that the shield might take a few seconds to turn with the enemy, so there's some openings there. But I think I'd prefer a version of the shield that either massively reduces damage or can be broken with enough damage. But I think this is one I'm going to have to play with in lots of different content to come to a full opinion on. Lastly, we got to see the return of old seasonal modes. Specifically, Savathun's Spire was shown in the stream. It's not the most interesting thing to have seasonal content return. Seasonal content feels like it's always been designed around the idea of being interesting enough just to keep our interest until the next bit of content. But considering the amount of content we've lost from Destiny over the years, getting some back is a simple and easy way to add more variety to the game, especially if these modes continue to receive updates. And with the addition of Banes being added to the mode, alongside new modifiers which were confirmed, I think that might be enough to spice it up as long as the rewards are interesting. But unfortunately, the stream wasn't all positives, especially when they got to the topic of gear tiers. Now, at first, I thought they were doing a really good job talking about gear tiers and addressing the concerns that people have, calling it sunsetting 2.0. Now, the problem is they kind of ruined the discussion by talking about the new and featured gear system. This is going to allow new armor to come with an intrinsic damage resistance that is tied to each tier all the way up to 15%. And new kinetic and energy slot weapons will also gain an additional damage bonus. What's so frustrating is that this completely flies in the face of everything they just talked about. How can they sit there and talk to the community and say your existing gear will be just as good in the new expansion, and then announce bonuses that most of that gear will be excluded from? It kind of just feels out of touch. Now to clarify, these bonuses are minuscule. Most weaker damage perks in the game can match or surpass these weapon bonuses easily, but the problem is the precedent it sets. Bungie is actively telling their player base that these weapons, majority of which will be locked behind a paywall, are objectively better than their closest equivalent in the current loot pool. All so that they can encourage players to farm for new gear, something that majority were already going to do. I just talked about how interesting the crossbow, rocket pulse, and shotgun hand cannon were. You don't need to convince me to farm these weapons, Bungie. They sound really fun. I'm going to do that anyway. And looking at the addition of tier 5s, I'm a sucker for that. I'm absolutely going to spend hours farming for tier 5 weapons just because they exist, even if they're not particularly better. It also highlights a big issue that I've had with the game for a while. The seasonal artifact already dictates the sandbox and meta in such an unnatural way, and this feels like an extension of that. It's taking control away from the players, where instead of letting them play and build however they want, it's instead pushing them into playing how the developers choose. I've never been a fan of that, ever since the artifact was first introduced in Season of the Undying. But for me, this change is a step too far, and I really hope Bungie step back on this before the expansion launches. The last thing to catch my attention wasn't something discussed on the stream specifically, and was instead something confirmed by DMG afterwards on Twitter. During the stream, they discussed the changes made to the UI and menus, including tooltips and more info. And these are really good changes. One of my biggest criticisms towards Destiny for years has been how much information menus and descriptions withhold from the player, and how many people often need to rely on external third-party sources just to get basic information about the game. So these changes are a really big win. I would have put them in my positive section if that's all I had to say about it. However, just like the gear bonuses, it's one step forward and two steps back. User Mossy Max on Twitter noticed that the enhanced traits on perks are now highlighted separately from the description, which is another really good quality of life change. However, we can see from the example shown that the description for Incandescent is now incredibly vague. DMG spoke to the team and was able to confirm that this is an intentional change to purposely hide certain descriptions, allowing players to discover them in-game. Bungie, please. I really could not believe what I was reading when I saw this. If I had seen this in the full game, I would have assumed it's a bug. I am all for allowing players to discover things through gameplay, and I think that's something Destiny can do pretty well occasionally, like how certain exotic armor can have certain synergy with exotic weapons. But enhanced traits is really not the place for vagueness. Assuming Enhanced Incandescent isn't changing or getting buffed, what this vagueness is hiding is that killing higher tier targets or kills with Ember of Ashes equipped will increase the amount of Scorch spread to enemies by 5. In case you are unaware, it takes 100 stacks of Scorch to cause an ignition. While 5 additional stacks will help you reach that ignition statistically faster, it is not an enhancement that 99% of players will notice in gameplay, which means there is no discovery. It's being intentionally vague for the sake of creating mystery, but it's not a mystery that's interesting to solve. I really don't want to sound like I'm being too harsh against the developers for these two changes. I cannot overstate how exciting I found some of the other announcements, even if some of them were additional looks at things we'd already seen. But these two issues are honestly too big to ignore and really overshadow my excitement for the other announcements. However, none of these changes are live yet, so there's still time for all of them, good or bad, to be reworked and adjusted over time. The only thing we can do as a community right now is give our feedback and hope it's taken on board. Thank you for watching, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on these changes in the comments below. I don't know, maybe you have a different take on some of these negative points that I'm not seeing. After the stream, I literally messaged some friends to be like, hey, am I missing something? I don't see why Bungie would do this. So there is some potential that I'm just missing the point. But for now, I hope you all enjoyed, I hope you all had a great day, and I'll see you next time.